At 6 a.m., my unemployed sister showed up at the apartment I rent from my parents. "I'll live here," Mom said. "We're doubling your rent to cover our expenses." When I said I'd move out, they smirked. So I took all the furniture. I want to tell you about the moment I understood that being dependable in the wrong family is its own kind of trap. Not a dramatic trap, not a movie trap where the villain twirls his mustache and explains the plan. More like a slow one. The kind where you look down one day and realize you've been standing in quicksand for 6 years, and the people watching from dry ground have been calling your stillness loyalty. That's where I was the morning Chloe knocked on my door at 6 in the morning with a garbage bag of clothes and the full confidence of someone who had never once been told no and meant it. But to understand that morning, you need to understand everything before it, because none of this started with Chloe. It started with who I learned to be inside our family, and that started a long time ago. My name is Adam. I'm 28 years old. I work the overnight receiving shift at a regional distribution center about 20 minutes from the house I grew up in. I've worked there for 4 years. Before that, I stocked shelves at a grocery warehouse, and before that, I loaded trucks for a freight company starting the week after I graduated high school. I have never gone more than 3 weeks between jobs. I have never bounced a check. I have never called my parents to ask for money. These facts matter, not because they make me special, but because in my family, they made me invisible. There are 2 kinds of kids in every unbalanced family. There's the one who gets the attention, and there's the one who earns it by not needing it. My sister Chloe was the first kind. I was the second. Chloe is 26. She's smart, actually. Funny when she wants to be. She has a way of walking into a room and immediately understanding where the center of it is and positioning herself there. I don't say that as a criticism, it's just true. Chloe has always known how to be seen. From the time we were kids, the family energy organized itself around her. Not because my parents were bad people, or at least not because they started out that way. I think it began because Chloe was louder, more emotional, quicker to cry, quicker to need. And my parents responded to need the way most parents do. They moved toward it, they soothed it, they solved it. Meanwhile, I sat quietly and did my homework and made my own lunch and learned to interpret their relief at my self-sufficiency as a form of love. If I didn't need them, they didn't have to worry about me. And not worrying about me meant they were free to focus on Chloe. I told myself this was fine. I told myself I was fine. I was 9 when I first remember fixing something in the house by myself. A cabinet door in the kitchen that had come off its hinge. I'd watched my dad ignore it for 3 weeks, watched my mom ask him twice and get a, yeah, I'll get to it. So one afternoon, I found a screwdriver in the junk drawer and tightened the screws myself. My dad noticed that night and said, I was gonna do that. My mom said nothing. Chloe said, "You're such a dork, Adam." That was the template. I fixed things. Nobody said thank you. We moved on. By the time I was in high school, I was doing the yard, taking the trash out without being asked, doing my own laundry while Chloe left hers in a pile on her floor and waited for my mom to deal with it. My parents called me responsible. The way they said it always felt like a job title rather than a compliment, like they were explaining to someone why they'd promoted me. He's very responsible. Responsible meant I didn't complain when Chloe got a car for her 16th birthday, and I got a handshake and told I could use my mom's car on weekends. Responsible meant when Chloe stayed out past curfew and the house turned into a panic, I was the one who quietly texted her friends until I found where she was. Responsible meant when my dad's back went out the summer I was 17, I took on his weekend handyman jobs and handed the cash directly to my mom and never mentioned it. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this so you understand that I didn't walk into the situation I'm about to describe naive. I understood exactly how the balance in my family worked. I just kept believing that if I held up my end long enough, eventually it would even out. It didn't. I moved into the apartment above my parents' garage 6 years ago when I was 22. The original pitch was straightforward. My parents owned the garage apartment. It had been used for storage for years, but after a weekend of clearing it out, it was livable. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a bathroom, a living space that wasn't big but wasn't cramped either. My dad said he'd rent it to me for $900 a month. He called it the family rate. I knew enough to look up comparable places across town, and the range was $850 to $950 for something similar. So $900 wasn't charity. It was fair. What there wasn't, and I want to be clear about this, was a lease. No written agreement, no deposit, just a handshake and an understanding that I'd put cash in an envelope on the first of the month and slide it across the kitchen counter in the main house. My dad would nod. That would be it. Month to month. Informal. Family. I was 22, and I thought that was fine. I figured the informality was a kindness, a sign of trust. I didn't yet understand that the absence of a written agreement wasn't flexibility. It was leverage, but I'd learned. The apartment was empty when I moved in. My parents hadn't furnished it. There were blinds on the windows and carpet on the floor, and that was the entirety of what they provided. Everything else was mine to figure out. I bought a couch first because sleeping on the floor wasn't an option. $400 from a furniture store, the cheapest thing on the floor that wasn't embarrassing. I carried it up the stairs alone, one end at a time. Then I found a bed frame on Craigslist for $60, solid wood from the 80s that a retired couple north of town was clearing out. I borrowed a truck, drove out and got it, sanded every surface, repainted it in the building's laundry room with the door propped open for ventilation. It took a weekend. I was proud of it. The kitchen table came from a thrift shop. Small, square, 2 chairs that didn't quite match but were both sturdy. $12 for the table, $5 $10 each for the chairs. I cleaned them with bleach water and let them dry on the sidewalk. Over the next few months, I filled the place in. A secondhand dresser I refinished. Curtains from a discount store. A rug from a garage sale for $15. Nearly new. Every pot, every pan, every dish, every glass, every fork, every towel, every picture on the wall, every shelf I mounted, every curtain rod I hung. Not one single thing in that apartment came from my parents. They provided 4 walls, a floor, a ceiling, and a working toilet. Everything else was mine. Bought with my money, chosen by me, carried up those stairs by me. I want you to hold on to that, because later when my mother looked me in the eye and told me to leave the furniture for Chloe, she was saying, leave everything you own. She just dressed it up as generosity. For the first 2 or 3 years, the arrangement worked well enough. I paid my rent on the first. I kept to myself. I fixed things when they broke because asking my dad meant waiting weeks and then watching him make it worse. The bathroom caulk, the sticky window, the outlet in the kitchen that tripped if you ran the microwave, and the coffee maker at the same time. I handled all of it. My relationship with my parents during this period was what I'd call politely distant. Sunday dinners every few weeks. I showed up, helped in the kitchen, talked about work, drove home. Chloe was sometimes there, sometimes not, depending on whatever situation she was in that month. She was in her early 20s and cycling through jobs and apartments and relationships with a momentum I found exhausting just to observe. At 23, she'd been a receptionist at a dental office, then a leasing agent, then briefly a personal trainer, then a social media manager for a local boutique. Each job lasted between 4 and 8 months. Each ending had a story. The dentist was controlling. The property company was toxic. The gym didn't pay enough. The boutique owner was impossible. I never heard Chloe say I quit because I wanted something different. There was always a villain. There was always a reason it wasn't her fault. My parents absorbed every one of these stories without question. If Chloe said the manager was toxic, the manager was toxic. They never pushed back. They just nodded and said she was brave for not staying somewhere that didn't serve her, and covered her expenses until the next thing materialized. Meanwhile, when I got promoted to lead receiver at the distribution center, my mom's response at Sunday dinner was, "Don't let it go to your head. Titles make people lazy." That was the temperature in our family. That was what fair looked like. The first serious crack happened at my mother's birthday dinner in October. It was a Sunday. Roast chicken, green beans, a store cake with thick, too sweet frosting. I got there early because that's what I do. My dad handed me a toolbox within 5 minutes of my arrival and pointed at a cabinet hinge that had been loose for what looked like months. I fixed it while my mom set the table. Chloe arrived 45 minutes late with a paper bag from a bakery and announced it like it was a gift delivery. "I brought a little treat," she said. My parents lit up. "Look at our girl," my dad said, hugging her at the door. My mom beamed. I had just spent 20 minutes on my knees in the hallway replacing a hinge I hadn't broken. We sat down to dinner. My dad lifted his glass and said, "Let's go around. One thing we're proud of this year." My dad talked about refinancing the house. My mom talked about her container garden. My Aunt Nora, who is my dad's sister and the most level person in any room our family occupies, talked about a community literacy program. Then me. I said I'd been promoted to lead receiver and was learning to manage scheduling for a team of 8. Aunt Nora said, "That's solid work, Adam." I could tell she meant it. My mom, without looking up from her plate, said, "Don't get cocky. Titles make people lazy." Then Chloe. She leaned back and said, "I'm proud that I finally prioritized my mental health. I left a job that didn't align with my values. That took real courage." My dad beamed. He said, "That is brave." My mom nodded like Chloe had announced she'd summited Everest. Chloe had left her job at the boutique in August. She'd been unemployed for 7 weeks. She was living in my parents' house, paying no rent, driving my mom's car 3 days a week. But she'd been brave. I chewed my chicken and thought about the rent envelope on my dresser at home, already sealed. I thought about the Saturday I'd spent re-caulking my own bathtub because the old caulk had cracked. I thought about the $300 Chloe borrowed in 2021 that never came back. After cake, my mom was wrapping leftovers and said, in her most casual voice, the one she uses when she's already decided something and doesn't want to fight, she said, "By the way, we've been thinking Chloe might spend a little time upstairs. Just for a soft reset. It makes sense. You're responsible. She'll learn from the structure." I went still. I said, "Upstairs in my apartment?" My mom kept rapping. She said, "Just for a bit. We'll chat about details later." Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway. She said, "Relax. It's family." My dad walked in and grabbed a drumstick off the counter and said, "Don't be territorial, Adam. You rent. We own it." I didn't say anything. I stacked the container lids one by one until they clicked. My stomach felt like I'd swallowed a stone. I carried the trash out and stood in the dark driveway for a minute. The apartment light glowed over the garage. My lamp, the one I'd bought at a garage sale for $8, and rewired myself. I told myself it was going to be fine. I was wrong. The hints didn't stop after that dinner. They picked up frequency. Over the next 3 months, comments came at every gathering. "Chloe needs a fresh environment. A change of scenery would do her good. You're so structured, Adam. Maybe that would rub off." Always framed as observations, never as the plan they clearly already were. I started mentioning in conversation that my arrangement was working well, trying to plant stability as a verbal precedent. My parents nodded along when I said these things. Then 3 days later, my mom would text something like, "Chloe had a really hard week. She could use a change." The timeline arrived in March. It was a Thursday morning, 6:45. Someone knocked on my apartment door. I opened it, and Chloe was standing there with a large large duffel bag and a garbage bag with the neck twisted closed. "I'm staying here for a bit," she said. Mom said it's fine. I stood in the doorway and felt something cold settle in my chest. I said, "No, you're not." She pushed past me into the apartment, set the duffel on my couch. She said, "I already texted Mom and she said it's totally fine." I called my mother from my bedroom while Chloe opened the refrigerator and started rearranging things. My mom answered on the second ring, voice fully awake, which told me she'd been expecting the call. I said, "What is this?" She said, "Adam, she needs stability right now. You have a routine, a good setup. It'll be good for her. It won't be forever." I said, "This is my apartment. She can't just move in." My mom's voice went quiet and careful. She said, "It's our apartment, Adam. We've always let you stay there as a courtesy. Chloe needs it right now. Let me stay there as a courtesy." I had paid $900 a month for 72 consecutive months. I had fixed every broken thing in that apartment with my own time and my own tools. I had filled it with my own furniture. I had treated it with more care than most people treat things they own outright, and my mother was describing 6 years of payment as a courtesy she extended to me. I called my dad next. He said, "More people means more expenses. Expect the rent to adjust." I said, "You can't be serious." He said, "You're lucky we let you stay there. Be a grown-up." He hung up. I stood in my bathroom with the door locked and looked at myself in the mirror. Then I went out and told Chloe she needed to be gone by the weekend. She laughed. She said, "Mom already said I could stay. You don't get a vote." I went to work. I spent the entire shift doing math in my head and trying to figure out if I was overreacting. I wasn't. Chloe did not leave by the weekend. She unpacked. That's the word that keeps coming back. She didn't visit. She unpacked. Hangers in my closet, pushing my clothes to one side. Makeup and skincare products arranged across my bathroom counter in a permanent-looking order. Her phone charger plugged into the outlet next to my bed. Her laptop cord running to the spot on my couch where I normally sat. The wet towels on the floor got to me faster than anything else. I'm not a neat freak, but I have a system. Towels go on the rack. Chloe's towels were always on the floor. Every morning, wet towels on the bathroom floor. I'd pick them up. She'd drop them again. I said something after the third time. She said, "Oh my God, Adam, they're towels." She had people over on a Tuesday night. 2 friends, a bottle of wine, a playlist too loud for a weeknight in a small apartment. I had a 5:45 alarm. I asked her at 10 p.m. to keep it down. She turned it down maybe 15%. At midnight, it was back up. At 12:30, I went out again. One of her friends said, "Oh, wow, he's serious." They moved to the parking lot and laughed from outside my window until almost 2. I said something to my parents the next morning. My mom said, "She's going through something. Give her grace." My dad said, "You're not the only one who lives there anymore." I went back to my apartment and sat at my kitchen table and wrote down one number. The number of months I'd paid rent, 72. Then I multiplied. 72 times 900, $64,800. I had paid my parents $64,800 in cash, on time, every month without complaint, and they were telling me I needed to adjust. I folded the piece of paper and put it in my work bag. I looked at it sometimes when I needed to remember that I wasn't the unreasonable one. The official call came on a Friday. Dad said, "Rent's going to $1,800 starting next month. That covers both of you." I was in the break room at work. "That's double," I said. He said, "2 people means double the utilities. Inflation's real. You're an adult." I said, "I pay my own utilities. Chloe doesn't contribute to anything." He said, "Don't pit yourself against your sister." My mom got on the line. "She's family, Adam. We're asking you to help." I opened my banking app right there. My take-home was $2,300 a month. $1,800 for rent would leave $500. Car insurance, $94. Phone, $45. Gas, $80 to $100. Groceries, $160. I was already at the edge before Chloe had been raiding my refrigerator for 3 weeks. I thought about her at that moment, probably still asleep on my couch in the gray hoodie she'd borrowed without asking and hadn't returned. I thought about driving home to dishes in the sink she hadn't done, a bathroom counter buried under her things, a couch repositioned to an angle I'd never chosen, and I made a decision, not in anger, quietly, with full information. I was going to move out. I didn't tell anyone. That Friday night, I came home and made dinner and ate at my kitchen table while Chloe narrated a TikTok drama from the couch, and I didn't say a word about what I was planning. On Saturday morning, I opened Zillow. I found 3 listings, emailed all 3, had 2 responses by Monday. By Wednesday, I'd toured the fastest to respond. Second floor of a 4-unit building about 3 miles from the distribution center. 1 bedroom, good light. A working exhaust fan in the bathroom, which sounds minor until you've lived without one. The landlord was a retired civil engineer named Gary, who had owned the building for 19 years and managed it himself. He showed me the unit, shook my hand, told me he had a waiting list but a spot had just opened. I handed him printed copies of my last 3 months of bank statements, my last 2 pay stubs, and a letter from my supervisor confirming my employment and tenure. Gary read through everything carefully. He asked 3 questions. He said the apartment was $875 a month on a 12-month lease. He'd let me know. He called that Friday, said the unit was mine. I signed the lease Saturday afternoon. Gary handed me 2 sets of keys. I drove to the hardware store and labeled both sets. Then I drove to my bank, got a cashier's check for the deposit and first month, and handed it to Gary at his front door. He wrote me a receipt. I folded it into my wallet. I drove home. Chloe was on my couch. I made dinner. I said nothing. I started collecting cardboard boxes from the receiving dock at work 3 days before I signed the lease. I kept them flat in the back of my car, brought them up a few at a time, stacked them inside my closet behind my hanging clothes. Chloe never noticed. The formal announcement came at a Sunday dinner the third week of April. I had a move-out date in my head, 10 days away. I went to dinner because not going would have made them suspicious. My dad cleared his throat and announced it like a business decision. He said, "We've all talked it over. Chloe will be staying in the apartment long-term. That's decided. Rent adjusts to $1,800, May 1st. My mom looked at me with a careful smile that was really a dare. Chloe sat in my old chair at the table and swirled her wine. I put my fork down slowly. I said, "I won't be paying $1,800. If that's the arrangement, I'm moving out." My mom said, "Adam, don't start." My dad's face tightened. He said, "We've already made the decision. This isn't up for discussion." I said, "It is for me." I said, "I've paid you $900 a month for 6 years. Every piece of furniture in that apartment, every dish, every towel, every curtain, I bought with my own money. If Chloe's moving in, I'm moving out. Everything in it leaves with me." My mom slammed her hand on the table. She said, "Don't be cruel. Your sister needs those things. Leave the furniture." Chloe said, "Yeah, don't be petty. It's just stuff." I said, "It's my stuff. I have receipts for most of it." My dad said, "That is our property. You live there at our discretion." I said, "I've been paying you $64,000 over 6 years at your discretion, and I'd like it back in furniture if it's all the same to you." Nobody said anything for 4 seconds. Then my dad said, "You do this, and you're burning a bridge you won't rebuild." I picked up my fork and kept eating. I said, "I know." I chose a Tuesday because Tuesdays Chloe sleeps late. I'd been living with her schedule for 6 weeks. Without an appointment, she didn't surface before 11. I needed a head start. I set my alarm for 4:30. I was dressed by 4:45. I pulled the flat-packed boxes from my car, brought them up in 2 trips, and started working with a podcast in one earbud. I'd done a full inventory the week before. I knew what was going where. I'd thought through the order. Small boxes first so I could stack them along the wall of the truck and work methodically. I'd rented a 15-foot U-Haul the prior Thursday. Dishes in a medium box with towels as padding. Books in a small box because books are dense. Bathroom things in a laundry basket. Curtains came down rod and all. By 8 a.m., I had everything except the large furniture. I texted my coworker Marcus, who is 6'2", and owed me a favor for covering his shift in February. He showed up at 8:15 with a coffee for me and took in the scene without much explanation. He said, "We doing a full extraction?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Cool, let's go." Marcus and I had the couch down the stairs in 8 minutes. Bed frame apart with an Allen key in 10. Dresser, kitchen table, chairs, TV, rug rolled and tied. Marcus worked without asking questions, and I appreciated that more than I can explain. We loaded the fridge last. I'd emptied it the night before and moved perishables to a cooler. The fridge was technically the largest thing to move, and I'd been thinking about it for a week. It had been in the apartment when I moved in, and years ago my dad had mentioned it was left by a previous tenant and wasn't theirs. I should have gotten that in writing. Instead, I had a voice memo. 2 years back when I'd replaced the cracked interior shelves, I'd kept the receipt, and I'd recorded my dad's voice on my phone one evening when he'd said, "That old Frigidaire's not really ours. You can have it." Still had both. Marcus and I had the fridge on a dolly and into the truck by 11:15. Chloe came out at 11:48. I know the exact time because I checked my watch when I heard the upstairs door. She was in pajama pants and my hoodie, the gray one with the distribution center logo I'd been looking for since March, sleep creases on her cheek. She squinted at the U-Haul in the driveway. Then she looked at the truck, then at me, then at Marcus, who was tying down the load and deliberately not making eye contact with anyone. Chloe said, "What is this?" I said, "I'm moving out." She laughed, the kind that covers something. She said, "You're so dramatic. You'll be back in a week." I went upstairs for the last things. Shower curtain rod, small shelf above the toilet. The 2-board shelving unit I'd mounted in the hallway on metal brackets drilled into the studs. I unscrewed the brackets, took down the boards, packed the hardware into a Ziploc bag. Chloe was at the bottom of the stairs when I came back down, more awake now, the amusement gone. She said, "You're literally unscrewing shelves from the wall." I said, "I installed them. They're mine." She said, "You're going to leave holes in the wall." I said, "I can leave the anchors in. They can redecorate." She followed me to the truck. Marcus stepped down from the truck bed and found something to do on the far side of the vehicle. Chloe's voice changed. The joking tone was gone. She said, "You can't take the fridge. The fridge stays with the apartment." I took out my phone, pulled up the appliance parts receipt with my name on the store account, then pulled up the voice memo, my dad's voice in a tinny phone recording saying, "That old Frigidaire's not really ours. It was left by the tenants before you. You can have it." I held the phone up and let her hear the first 10 seconds. She stared at my phone, then at me. Something in her face ran through several expressions very fast and landed on something I hadn't seen from her before. Not anger. The realization that I'd been planning this longer than she'd understood. She said, "You recorded, Dad." I said, "I record a lot of things. It's a good habit." I walked the dolly to the truck. Marcus and I loaded the fridge. My mom appeared in the driveway in her housecoat. She said, "Adam, stop right now. This is not how we do things. Come inside." I said, "I told you at dinner I was moving out. I'm moving out." She said, "You're doing this to hurt your sister." I said, "I have a signed lease and a truck and a start time tomorrow." She said, "Leave that furniture. Chloe needs it." I said, "I bought the furniture." She said, "It's in our property." I said, "It's mine." Long moment. My mom looked at the truck, looked at Marcus, who was examining the wheel well with deep professional interest, looked at me. She said, "Your father is going to be devastated." I said, "He's welcome to call me." I got in the truck. Marcus got in the passenger seat. I drove out of the driveway, and in my mirror I watched my mom standing on the front walk with Chloe beside her. The garage apartment windows were empty behind them. I drove drove north. Marcus and I unloaded in about 2 hours. He left at 2, clapping me on the shoulder on his way out. I set up the bed first because that was the most important thing, then the couch, then the kitchen. The fridge took the longest because I'd always meant to level it properly, and this time I did. By 4:30, the apartment was functional. Not decorated, not arranged perfectly, but mine. My dishes in my cabinets, my couch where I put it, my table by the window, my fridge with the good shelves. I sat down and ate crackers and cheese because I hadn't eaten all day. I looked at the window. Late afternoon light, the kind that makes ordinary rooms look significant. Then I picked up my phone. 26 missed calls, 14 texts, 3 voicemails, my mom's texts. Adam, this is extremely childish. Adam, you cannot just do this. Adam, Chloe is devastated. Adam, call me. Adam, we need to talk right now. Adam, your father is furious. My dad, you embarrassed this family. We are done discussing this if you don't call tonight. This is not what we raised you to be. Chloe, you are an actual thief. Dad is calling his lawyer. You took everything you are disgusting. Then an hour later, I'm sleeping on the floor because of you. Are you happy? I sat with the phone in my hand for a minute, set it face down on the table, ate 3 more crackers, looked at the window again. Outside, someone was walking a dog on the sidewalk below. A medium-sized mutt with white paws, very interested in a patch of grass near the curb. The person walking it was on their phone, holding the leash with one hand, not paying attention. The dog pulled toward the grass. The person followed absently. I watched this for a while. Then I got up and washed my plate, put the crackers back in the box, hung my towel on the bathroom rod, made my bed properly and tucked the corners. I locked my door and went to bed. The campaign started the following morning. I want to be precise about this. What happened in the weeks after I moved out was not random emotional reaction. It was systematic. My family applied pressure in rotating cycles, each type failing and then cycling to the next, with a consistency that suggested either coordination or a shared playbook developed over a lifetime of getting what they wanted from me. Cycle 1 was anger. This lasted about 5 days. My dad left a voicemail on day 1 that I've kept on my phone because it clarified things. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the effort underneath. He said, Adam, I want you to understand what you've done. You've taken property from our home. You've humiliated your mother. You've left your sister without basic necessities out of spite. This is not who I raised. If you don't return the furniture within 48 hours, we'll be consulting a lawyer. Call me. I did not call him. I did look up the relevant property law for our state. Because I'd been paying rent, I had tenant status despite the lack of a written lease, which meant I had legal rights to remove my personal property upon vacating. The furniture, purchased by me, was unambiguously mine. The voice memo covered the fridge. Their legal position had no basis. I verified this quietly and moved on. The lawyer threat evaporated after 72 hours and was never mentioned again. Cycle 2 was guilt. This ran about 3 weeks. My mom was the architect. Texts at odd hours, late at night or early morning. She sent a photo of Chloe sitting on a mattress on the floor in the empty apartment. Face sad, overhead light harsh, surrounded by nothing. The caption said, "Look what you did." I looked at that photo for a while. I noticed the mattress was a decent one, which meant they'd already sourced it. I noticed Chloe was wearing a nice sweater. I noticed her phone was lit up on the floor beside her. I noticed my mom had either staged this photo or chosen the moment for maximum effect. I noted all of this and did not respond. My mom called mid-second week. I answered because I'd decided it was time for one real conversation. She started carefully. She said, "Adam, we've always wanted the best for you." She said, "Chloe is struggling in ways you don't understand because you've always had it together." I let her talk. Then I said, "Mom, I paid you $64,000 over 6 years, and you used it as leverage to force me to subsidize Chloe. I bought every piece of furniture in that apartment, and you told me to leave it for her. You doubled my rent without negotiation and called it a family contribution. I moved out. That's the whole story." Silence. She said, "We didn't know it felt that way." I said, "I told you several times." Directly. A pause. Then, voice shifting into something cooler, she said, "You've always been like this. Even as a kid, so rigid, so focused on fairness." I said, "I know. That's why I moved." She hung up. Cycle 3 was re-engagement. About a month in, the anger had failed because I didn't respond. The guilt had failed because I'd responded once and clearly and stopped, so they tried neutral. My dad called and talked for 90 seconds about nothing, weather, a home improvement project, as if we were catching up normally. Then he said, "The door's open if you want to come to Sunday dinner." I said, "I appreciate that." He said, "Chloe's been asking about you." I said, "That's nice." He said, "Think about the bridge." I said, "I'll think about it." He said, "Good. See you Sunday." I did not go Sunday. I didn't call to say I wasn't coming. I just didn't go. And I didn't go the following Sunday either. After the second missed Sunday, my mom texted, "Are you really going to hold this grudge forever?" I read it and thought about the word grudge. A grudge implies something done to you that you can't let go. What I had wasn't a grudge. It was a completely calibrated understanding of how my family operated and what they would do with my proximity if I gave it back to them. I wasn't withholding myself to punish them. I was withholding myself because giving it back had a cost I was no longer willing to pay. I didn't text back. 3 months after I moved out, I ran into my Aunt Nora at a grocery store 20 minutes from my new apartment. She was in the produce section holding 2 different apples with genuine indecision. We stood there for about 20 minutes. She asked how the new place was. I said mine. She asked about work. I told her I'd just been made assistant operations manager, a 12% 10% raise, and a small office I hadn't mentioned to anyone in my family. She said, "Adam, that's genuinely impressive." She said it the way she'd said "that's solid" at my mom's birthday dinner, like she actually meant it. Then she said, "I heard about the apartment situation," and she paused. She said, "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing." I said, "Your brother doesn't think so." She said, "My brother has been telling Chloe the word no means negotiate for 30 years. That's not your problem to fix." Before we parted, she put her hand on my arm and said, "You don't owe them the version of yourself that makes their choices easier." I drove home and sat in my car in the parking lot for a while before going inside. It's been almost a year since I drove that U-Haul north on a Tuesday morning. What I've found on the other side isn't dramatic. People tell a story about situations like this that's either very triumphant or very sad. Neither is exactly right. What it actually is quiet. The first thing I noticed when the calls finally slowed down was how much mental space I'd been using without knowing it. The constant low-level calculations. Is this going to upset them? If I do, will Chloe use it against me? What will my dad think? The calculations ran so constantly I'd stopped hearing them, the way you stop hearing a refrigerator hum until it stops. When it stopped, the quiet was almost startling. I started sleeping differently. Better is too simple a word. Differently. 8 hours. Waking at the natural end of them instead of surfacing early with my chest already tense. I started cooking real meals on weeknights instead of grabbing fast food because I was too depleted to stand at a stove. I started reading again. Actual books, an hour at a time without checking my phone. With $900 going to Gary instead of $1,800 going to my parents, I had money at the end of every month. Not a lot, but some. Enough to start a real emergency fund for the first time. Enough to replace my car's front tires in March when they were getting thin, rather than waiting until one failed on the highway. These are small things, but they are the texture of a stable life. My neighbor in the unit next to mine is a nursing student named Priya, who leaves for clinical rotations at 5 a.m. We started saying hello in the parking lot, then talking for a few minutes. Then one morning, when she was juggling groceries and a textbook, I held the door and we talked for 15 minutes in the hallway. I've gone to more social events in 11 months in this building than I did in 6 years above the garage. I bought a plant for the windowsill in September, a pothos. It's branched out enough now that I've redistributed the vines around the window frame. I water it Sunday mornings while I listen to the radio. My dad called in January. I answered because it had been long enough and I was curious rather than defensive. We made small talk for a minute. Then he said, "Your mother wants to know if you're coming to Easter." I said, "Not this year." He said, "When?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Are we ever going to move past this?" I said, "I'm not sure past is the right word. Some things just change." He was quiet. Then he said, "Chloe got a job, marketing coordinator. Started in November." I said, "That's good." I meant it. He said, "She seems to like it." I said, "I'm glad." Then he said something I hadn't expected. He said, "I don't know if we handled everything the right way." No apology, no specifics, just those words. With my dad, that was substantial. The closest thing to accountability I'd ever heard from him on a personal matter. I said, "I appreciate you saying that." He said, "You could come by sometime." I said, "Maybe." He said, "Your mother would like to see you." I said, "I know." We said goodbye. I stood in my kitchen and looked at the pothos on the windowsill. Maybe. I genuinely didn't know. I don't know today. People ask if I regret how I handled it. The direct answer is no. The more honest answer is I regret needing to handle it that way. I regret that 6 years of on-time payment and 0 problems didn't establish enough goodwill to protect my home. I regret it took me until 28 to understand that being the reliable one in a family that exploits reliability isn't a virtue, it's a role, and roles can be abdicated. I don't regret the furniture. Not a single shelf bracket. The furniture was never really about furniture. It was about every choice I'd ever made being treated as a given instead of a decision. It was about $64,000 paid without complaint being described as luck. It was about being told the space I lived in, the space I'd built from nothing, was a courtesy that could be revoked the moment it became more useful to someone else. Taking the furniture was the first time I drew a clear line between what I'd built and what I owed, and I drew it exactly where it was supposed to be, on my side. My name is Adam. I'm 28 years old. I work the overnight receiving shift, and I'm the assistant operations manager for the Eastern Dock. I have a 12-month lease with Gary. I have an emergency fund. I have a plant. I have a neighbor I can talk to in the parking lot without calculating the angle. I have an apartment where, when I lock the door, nobody on the other side of it thinks they own what's in here. That's mine. I built it. Nobody gave it to me, and that's enough.